My son put our family home up for sale the day after I buried my wife. I'm William Anderson, and for 34 years, this house was Elizabeth's pride and joy. What Christopher didn't know was that Elizabeth had been planning for this exact moment, and the $35 million inheritance he thought was his had strings attached that would change everything. The way he treated her memory in those final months told me everything I needed to know about his character. So I stayed silent. I watched. I waited. And I let him dig his own grave. See, some people think grief makes you weak. They're wrong. Grief can make you very, very patient. And when you're dealing with someone who mistakes your silence for stupidity, patience becomes your greatest weapon. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because this story is about more than money. It's about what happens when greed meets a mother's love that extends beyond the grave. Elizabeth passed away on March 15th, 2023. Cancer. 3 years of fighting, 3 years of me holding her hand through chemo, 3 years of Christopher showing up maybe twice a month if we were lucky. The funeral was on March 22nd. Christopher rushed through the whole thing. "Dad, we need to keep this moving," he kept saying. "People have places to be." Elizabeth had wanted a proper service. She'd planned every detail in her final weeks, the hymns, the flowers, even the exact wording for her obituary. But Christopher kept checking his watch. "She's gone, Dad. She can't appreciate the ceremony anyway." That should have been my first warning. 2 weeks later, he started with the suggestions. "Dad, you're 67. You can't handle this much house anymore." Our house is a 1987 colonial that Elizabeth renovated herself. Every room tells a story. The kitchen she redesigned for $28,000 because she loved hosting Christmas dinner. The hand-carved oak banisters she picked out for $3,400 because she said they made the house feel like home. Christopher saw none of it. "It's just wood and drywall, Dad. Mom's not coming back to appreciate it." I tried explaining what the house meant to Elizabeth, how she'd spent months choosing every fixture, every paint color, how she'd drawn detailed sketches of her vision for each room. "That's exactly the problem," Christopher said. "You're holding on to the past. Mom would want you to move forward." Would she? Because Elizabeth and I had talked about this exact scenario. What would happen if Christopher tried to push me around after she was gone? "He doesn't understand sacrifice," she'd told me during one of her hospital stays. "He's never had to fight for anything. Never had to build something from nothing." She was right. Christopher worked in marketing, made decent money, drove a BMW with $589 monthly payments. But he'd never understood what it meant to save every penny to buy your first house, to work double shifts to afford the renovations your wife dreamed about. To him, we were just middle-class people sitting on middle-class money. "Dad, I'm worried about you rattling around in this big house alone." The house is 1,800 square feet, hardly a mansion. "Maybe we should look at some nice retirement communities, something more manageable." More manageable for who? By September, the suggestions became pressure. "Dad, you're being stubborn. This house is worth at least $600,000. You could buy a nice condo and have money left over." He'd already looked up comparable sales, already calculated what he thought I should do with my life. "Christopher, your mother loved this house. Mom's dead, Dad." Just like that. No emotion, no respect. Mom's dead. End of discussion. That's when I knew Elizabeth had been right to worry. In October, he brought up retirement planning. "Dad, I don't think you understand how expensive care can get. If you need assisted living someday, this house equity could make the difference." Notice how he said, "could make the difference," not "would help you," like my future care was somehow his financial burden to manage. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own finances, son." Are you? When's the last time you balanced a checkbook? When's the last time you even looked at your investment portfolio? I'd been balancing checkbooks since before he was born, but Christopher saw an old man who'd worked with his hands his whole life, an electrician who couldn't possibly understand modern finance. "Dad, I'm trying to help you here, but you're being emotional about this house. You need to think logically." Logically. As if love and respect were somehow illogical concepts. That's when Christopher made his biggest mistake. He started acting like Elizabeth's death was somehow my fault for being too sentimental. But I wasn't being sentimental. I was being patient. Because Elizabeth had taught me something Christopher never learned. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone else reveal exactly who they are. By November, Christopher stopped asking and started telling. "Dad, I've been thinking. This house is too much for you. I'm going to help you sell it." Help me. Like I was some confused old man who couldn't handle his own affairs. "Christopher, I'm not ready to sell." "Ready? Dad, Mom's been gone 8 months. How long are you going to live in the past?" That night, I went up to Elizabeth's craft room. She'd kept it exactly the way she wanted, organized, purposeful, beautiful. And hidden in her desk drawer, I found something that made everything clear. A leather portfolio with house plans written in Elizabeth's handwriting. Inside were over 100 pages of notes, sketches, and plans, not just for our house, but for houses she'd dreamed of designing. Detailed architectural drawings, material specifications, cost breakdowns for everything from foundation work to finished carpentry. Elizabeth hadn't just renovated our house. She'd studied design like she was preparing for something bigger. On the last page, dated January 2023, 2 months before she died, she'd written, "This house is my masterpiece. Every room tells our story. If Christopher can't see that, he doesn't deserve to inherit it." My hands shook reading those words. Elizabeth had known. She'd seen what I was starting to see, that Christopher looked at our life together as something to be liquidated, not honored. The next morning, Christopher called. "Dad, I drove by yesterday. The gutters need work, and the driveway has cracks. You're looking at thousands in maintenance costs. Thousands. Like that was some insurmountable problem." "Dad, I'm serious. This house is becoming a liability. Mom wouldn't want you stressed about money." But Elizabeth had left detailed maintenance notes, too. Instructions for everything from seasonal gutter cleaning to annual HVAC servicing. She'd even budgeted for future repairs. She'd planned for everything except her son, treating her legacy like a burden. "Christopher, your mother put her heart into this house. Dad, heart doesn't pay for roof repairs." That's when I realized we weren't just talking about a house anymore. We were talking about whether Elizabeth's dreams mattered now that she couldn't defend them herself. In December, Christopher escalated again. "Dad, I talked to a real estate agent, Janet Morrison from Coldwell Banker. She thinks we could list for $680, maybe $700 if we stage it right." We, like he owned half the house. "You had no right to contact an agent." "Dad, I'm trying to be proactive here. The market's good right now, but it won't stay that way forever." Proactive. Christopher's favorite word for overstepping boundaries. "I also talked to a financial advisor, Tom Mitchell, downtown. He could help you invest the proceeds properly." Another stranger Christopher had brought into our business without asking. "Christopher, I don't need a financial advisor." "Dad, with respect, you worked as an electrician for 40 years. Tom handles portfolios worth millions. He knows things you don't." There it was, the condescension Elizabeth had worried about. Christopher didn't just think I was old. He thought I was stupid. But Elizabeth's portfolio contained something else Christopher didn't know about. A business card tucked between her drawings. David Coleman, estate planning attorney. On the back, Elizabeth had written, "Bill, if anything happens to me, call David immediately. Don't let Christopher pressure you into anything. Trust the plan." The plan. "What plan?" I called David that afternoon. "Mr. Anderson, I've been waiting for your call. Elizabeth said you might need guidance when Christopher started pushing about the house." Elizabeth had predicted this entire situation. "She was very specific about her concerns," David continued. "Would you be available to meet next week? There are some documents she wanted you to see. Documents Elizabeth had prepared without telling me. Plans she'd made while I was focused on her medical care." That evening, Christopher called again. "Dad, I scheduled a showing for this weekend. Janet wants to get some professional photos." "You what?" "Dad, calm down. It's just photos. We need to see what we're working with." "We, always we." "Christopher, cancel that showing." "Dad, be reasonable. Janet's doing this as a favor. Do you know how hard it is to get a good agent during the holidays?" Reasonable. Christopher's second favorite word for getting his way. I said cancel it. "Dad, I'm trying to help you here, but you're being impossible." Impossible, because I wouldn't let him sell my house out from under me. But I wasn't being impossible. I was buying time. Because if Elizabeth had taught me anything, it was that patience reveals truth. And I was about to discover just how much truth Elizabeth had prepared me for. The meeting with David Coleman was set for January 3rd. Christopher had no idea it was happening, but something told me that meeting would change everything. January 3rd arrived gray and cold. David Coleman's office was downtown, in one of those old buildings with marble lobbies and brass elevators, the kind of place that suggests serious money. Elizabeth had never mentioned David to me. In 34 years of marriage, she'd never kept secrets, except, apparently, she had. David was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from handling other people's problems all day. "Mr. Anderson, please sit down. Elizabeth spoke about you often during our meetings." "Meetings? How many meetings?" 7 over the past 4 years. She was very thorough in her planning. 4 years. Elizabeth had been preparing for this conversation since 2019. David opened a thick file labeled Anderson Family Trust. Elizabeth established this trust in March 2019, shortly after Christopher's divorce. She was concerned about his financial decision-making. Christopher's divorce had been expensive. Alimony, child support, lawyer fees. But he'd never asked us for help. She was particularly worried about what would happen to your home if something happened to her. She wanted to ensure Christopher couldn't pressure you into selling. David slid a document across the desk. Official letterhead, legal seals, Elizabeth's signature at the bottom. "This is the trust agreement. Your house, along with all other marital assets, are held in trust. You're the primary beneficiary and sole trustee." I stared at the papers. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means Christopher has no legal claim to any of your shared property. The house, the bank accounts, the investment portfolio, everything belongs to the trust until your death." "Investment portfolio?" "David, I think there's been a mistake. Elizabeth and I lived paycheck to paycheck most of our lives. We don't have an investment portfolio." David smiled. Elizabeth was very good at keeping secrets when she needed to. He opened another file. This one was labeled Portfolio Summary, December 2024. The number at the bottom made me forget how to breathe. $35,247,892.33. That's impossible. Elizabeth's father owned a small manufacturing company in Ohio. When he died in 1995, she inherited everything but never told anyone. She spent 28 years quietly growing that inheritance. 1995, the year we'd bought our house. I'd always wondered how we'd qualified for such a good mortgage with my electrician's salary. "She didn't want to burden you with the responsibility," David continued. "But she also didn't want Christopher to know. She was afraid it would change how he treated both of you." Elizabeth had been right to worry. "There's more," David said, pulling out a sealed envelope. "She recorded a video message for you. Would you like to watch it?" My hands shook as David set up a tablet on his desk. Elizabeth's face appeared on the screen, sitting in what looked like this same office. Her hair was shorter than I remembered. This must have been recorded during her treatment. "Hi, sweetheart. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone and Christopher is pushing you to sell our house." Her voice was exactly as I remembered. Strong, clear, purposeful. "I know this trust might seem like a betrayal, keeping secrets from you, but I was protecting both of us. Christopher has never understood the value of the things that can't be bought. Our home isn't just real estate to him. It's an asset to be liquidated." She paused, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. "Bill, our house isn't worth $600,000. It's worth everything. Every room we painted together, every repair you made, every holiday dinner, every quiet morning with coffee in our kitchen. Christopher can't see that value because he's never created anything lasting himself." The video was 12 minutes long. Elizabeth had thought of everything: instructions for the trust, explanations for the secrecy, even guidance for dealing with Christopher's inevitable reaction. "Don't let him make you feel guilty for honoring my wishes," she said near the end. "This house is my love letter to you, Bill. To us. To the life we built together. Christopher will try to tell you I'm gone, so it doesn't matter. But love doesn't die with the body. Love lives in the places we chose to put it." When the video ended, I sat in silence for several minutes. "Mr. Anderson?" David's voice was gentle. "Are you all right? Christopher called this morning. He's scheduled another showing for this weekend." "Does he have legal authority to schedule showings?" "No. But he seems to think he does. David leaned back in his chair. What would you like to do? I thought about Elizabeth's words, about Christopher's contempt for our life together, about his rush through her funeral, his dismissal of her dreams, his eagerness to turn our love story into a real estate transaction. I'd like to let him dig his hole a little deeper. David smiled. Elizabeth said you might say that. She said what? She predicted Christopher would try to sell the house before you discovered the trust. She also predicted you'd want to let him expose himself before revealing the truth. Elizabeth had known me better than I knew myself. What do you recommend? Let him proceed with the sale. Let him get comfortable with the idea that he's in control. The deeper he commits to his plan, the more devastating the truth will be. And legally? Legally, any sale contract he arranges will be void. He has no authority to sell trust property, but we don't have to tell him that until the closing. I thought about Christopher rushing through Elizabeth's funeral, about his dismissive comments about wood and drywall, about his assumption that grief made me weak and stupid. How long can we let this go on? As long as you want. You're the trustee. You have complete control. Complete control. Christopher had been so busy managing my life, he had no idea I'd never needed his management at all. I stood up and shook David's hand. Let's see how far he's willing to go. Because Elizabeth was right about one thing. Sometimes you have to let someone reveal exactly who they are before you show them exactly who you are. And Christopher had no idea who he was dealing with. I drove home from David's office in a daze. $35 million. Elizabeth had been secretly wealthy for almost 30 years, and I'd never suspected. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The way she'd never worried about money, even when my electrician's salary should have left us struggling. The way she'd always been able to afford her renovation projects without touching our savings. The way she'd insisted on paying for Christopher's college without loans. Elizabeth had been protecting all of us, and I'd been too trusting to see it. That evening, Christopher called. Dad, good news. Janet got the photographer scheduled for Saturday morning. Professional lighting, wide-angle lenses, the whole package. Christopher, I haven't agreed to sell the house. Dad, we've been over this. You can't maintain this place on your own, and frankly, you can't afford to. Can't afford to, if he only knew. Janet thinks we should price it at $680, maybe start at $700 and see what happens. $700,000. Christopher thought that was serious money. She also recommended some staging, maybe move some of Mom's furniture to storage, make the rooms look bigger. Elizabeth's furniture, the antique dining set she'd inherited from her grandmother, the reading chair where she'd spent countless evenings, the hope chest she'd bought for our first anniversary. Christopher, I'm not moving your mother's furniture. Dad, buyers need to see themselves in the space. Mom's stuff makes it feel like a museum. A museum. That's what Christopher thought of Elizabeth's carefully chosen possessions. Look, Dad, I know this is emotional for you, but we need to think practically. Practically. There was that word again. Saturday morning arrived with fresh snow. I watched from the living room window as Janet Morrison pulled up in her silver Mercedes. Christopher met her in the driveway, all smiles and handshakes. Then came the photographer, a young guy with expensive equipment and an attitude that screamed, artsy professional. I stayed upstairs while they worked. From my bedroom I could hear Christopher's voice carrying through the house. Yeah, my mom had good taste, but it's a little dated now. The kitchen's solid, but buyers will probably want to update the appliances. My dad's pretty attached to the place, but he's being realistic about what makes sense financially. Realistic. Christopher thought he was the only person in our family capable of realistic thinking. After they left, Christopher stayed behind. Dad, the photos should be ready by Monday. Janet wants to list Tuesday if that works. Tuesday seems fast. Dad, in this market, you don't wait around. Good houses sell in the first week. Good houses, like ours, was just inventory to be moved. Janet thinks we'll have offers by the weekend. Maybe multiple offers if we price it right. Multiple offers. Christopher was getting excited about an auction for our home. And Dad, I've been thinking about what you should do with the proceeds. Tom Mitchell, the financial advisor I mentioned, he specializes in retirement planning for people your age. People my age, like I was some generic elderly client instead of his father. Tom thinks you could comfortably afford a nice senior community with that kind of money. Maybe even one of the upscale places with golf courses. Golf courses. Christopher apparently thought I'd spent 40 years as an electrician so I could retire to some country club lifestyle. Christopher, I don't play golf. Dad, you could learn. The point is having options. Options. Christopher's vision of my future was all about his idea of what I should want. That evening, David Coleman called. "Mr. Anderson, how are things progressing?" "Christopher has a photographer coming Monday. He wants to list Tuesday. And you're comfortable letting this continue?" I thought about Elizabeth's video message, about her instructions to let Christopher reveal his true character. "I'm comfortable." "Good, because I have one more surprise from Elizabeth." "Another surprise?" "She arranged for certain people to be present when the truth comes out, people Christopher respects professionally." "What do you mean?" "Let's just say Elizabeth wanted witnesses when justice finally arrives." Elizabeth had planned for everything, including Christopher's humiliation. "Mr. Anderson, are you ready for what's coming?" I looked around our living room. Elizabeth's reading chair, her grandmother's china cabinet, the piano where she'd practiced hymns for church. Christopher saw all of this as obstacles to a real estate transaction, but Elizabeth had seen all of this as worth protecting. I'm ready. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their own choices. And Christopher was about to learn that some lessons can't be avoided forever. The house listing went live on Tuesday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Elizabeth would have appreciated the irony. Christopher called that afternoon, practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad, we already have 3 showings scheduled for tomorrow. Janet says that's really unusual for a first day." 3 strangers would be walking through Elizabeth's home, evaluating her life's work like a commodity. "And Dad, there's already some online interest. The virtual tour Janet posted has gotten 47 views since this morning. 47 people scrolling through photos of our bedroom, our kitchen, our living room, places where Elizabeth and I had shared 34 years of private moments. Janet thinks we might have offers by the weekend. The weekend. Elizabeth had been dead for 11 months, and Christopher was already counting down to turning our home into cash. Wednesday brought the first showing, a young couple with a toddler. I watched from the upstairs window as Janet Morrison led them around our property, pointing out features like she was conducting a tour. "The mature landscaping really adds value," I heard her tell them as they examined Elizabeth's garden. Mature landscaping. Elizabeth had spent 15 years carefully choosing and nurturing every plant, every flower, every tree. To Janet Morrison, it was just mature landscaping. Christopher joined the tour halfway through, coming in from work during his lunch break. "Yeah, my parents bought this place in '87, he told the couple as they stood in our living room. "It's got good bones, but obviously it needs updating." Good bones. Needs updating. Like Elizabeth's choices were somehow inadequate for modern living. "The kitchen's functional, but most buyers today want more open concept," Christopher continued. "You could probably take down this wall here and really open up the space." That wall separated Elizabeth's kitchen from her dining room. She'd specifically chosen the layout because she liked having distinct spaces for cooking and entertaining. And upstairs, the master bedroom is decent-sized, but you might want to combine it with the spare room to create a proper suite. The spare room where Elizabeth had kept her craft supplies, where she'd worked on her design sketches, where she'd planned the renovations that Christopher now described as dated. After the couple left, Christopher stayed behind. "Dad, they seemed really interested. Janet thinks they'll make an offer." "Christopher, that couple wants to tear down walls your mother specifically chose. Dad, that's what buyers do." "That's what?" "They make houses work for their lives, not live around someone else's choices." Someone else's choices. He was talking about his own mother. Thursday brought 2 more showings, a retired couple looking to downsize, and a real estate investor who spent most of his time measuring rooms and taking notes about renovation potential. The investor was particularly brutal. "This kitchen layout is really inefficient," he told Janet while I listened from the next room. "You'd have to gut the whole thing to make it competitive." Gut the whole thing. Elizabeth's $28,000 renovation dismissed with casual cruelty. And these built-in shelves in the living room, total waste of space. Most buyers want clean walls they can decorate themselves. Those built-in shelves held Elizabeth's books, her collection of design magazines, the small treasures she'd gathered over decades of making our house a home. Christopher nodded along with every criticism. Yeah, my parents had very specific tastes, he told the investor. Most buyers today want something more neutral. Specific tastes. Like Elizabeth's preferences were somehow embarrassing rather than personal. Friday afternoon, Christopher called with news. Dad, we got an offer. $650,000 cash, 30-day closing. Cash offer. 30-day closing. Christopher sounded like he'd won the lottery. The buyers are the couple from Wednesday, the Pattersons. They love the neighborhood and they're pre-approved for renovations. Pre-approved for renovations. Ready to erase everything Elizabeth had created. Janet recommends we accept. Cash offers are rare, and 30 days gives us time to find you something nice. Find me something nice. Christopher was already planning my displacement. What do you think, Dad? What did I think? I thought Christopher had spent the week parading strangers through his mother's home, encouraging them to criticize her choices and celebrating their plans to destroy her legacy. It sounds like a fair offer, I said, because Elizabeth had taught me that sometimes you have to let people hang themselves with their own rope. Great, I'll tell Janet we accept. She'll draw up the paperwork this weekend. Saturday morning, Christopher arrived with contracts and a bottle of champagne. Dad, this is really happening. Janet got the paperwork expedited. We can sign today and be in escrow by Monday. He popped the champagne before I could object, celebrating the sale of Elizabeth's home like it was some kind of victory. To Mom, he said, raising his glass, she'd be happy we're being practical about this. Practical. Christopher thought Elizabeth would be happy watching her life's work get sold for demolition. And Dad, I've got some good news about your next steps. Tom Mitchell found a perfect retirement community. Sunny Meadows, about 20 minutes from here. Golf course, activity center, even a dining hall so you don't have to cook. Sunny Meadows. Christopher had already picked out my prison. The entrance fee is only $400,000, and monthly fees are about $3,000. You'll have plenty left over for a comfortable lifestyle. $400,000 entrance fee, $3,000 monthly. Christopher had calculated my entire future around his assumption that I was financially helpless. Tom thinks you could move in as early as April. Spring's a great time for a fresh start. Fresh start. Christopher's euphemism for erasing my entire life. I scheduled a tour for next Thursday. Tom will meet us there to go over the financial details. A tour he'd scheduled without asking. Financial details he'd arranged without consulting me. Dad, I know this seems fast, but good opportunities don't wait around. Good opportunities, like abandoning my home, was somehow good for me. That afternoon, we met the Pattersons at the house for a final walkthrough. Michael Patterson was a software engineer. His wife Sarah was a nurse. Nice people who had no idea they were touring a mausoleum. We're so excited about the potential here, Sarah told me as we stood in Elizabeth's kitchen. We're planning to open up this whole space, maybe add an island. Add an island. Remove the walls Elizabeth had specifically chosen to keep. And we love that window seat in the living room, Michael added. Our daughter will love reading there. That window seat was where Elizabeth had sat every morning with her coffee, watching the sunrise through the trees she'd planted. Although we'll probably replace the cushions, Sarah continued. Something more modern. Replace the cushions Elizabeth had sewn herself, in fabric she'd chosen to match the room's colors. Christopher beamed through the entire conversation. The Pattersons have such great vision for this place, he told me afterward. Mom would approve of what they're planning. Mom would approve. Christopher actually believed Elizabeth would be happy watching strangers replace her cushions and tear down her walls, but I knew something Christopher didn't. Elizabeth had planned for this exact moment, and she'd arranged for certain people to witness what happened next. The closing was scheduled for March 15th, 1 year to the day after Elizabeth died. She'd planned that timing too. March 15th arrived clear and cold. Exactly 1 year since Elizabeth's death. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Premier Title Company downtown. Christopher picked me up at 9:30, practically bouncing with excitement. Dad, this is it. By noon today, you'll have $650,000 in the bank and a fresh start ahead of you. $650,000. Christopher thought that was life-changing money. And I confirmed the tour at Sunny Meadows for next week. Tom Mitchell will meet us there Tuesday to set up your new accounts. New accounts Christopher assumed I'd need his help managing. Premier Title Company occupied the ground floor of a glass office building.
all leather chairs and mahogany tables designed to make real estate transactions feel important. The Pattersons were already there when we arrived, along with their agent and attorney. Michael wore a nervous smile. Sarah clutched a folder of renovation plans. Janet Morrison introduced everyone like we were gathering for a celebration, rather than dismantling my life. William, Christopher, meet the Patterson family. Michael, Sarah, and they brought pictures of their renovation ideas. Sarah spread her plans across the conference table.
Computer-generated images showing our house gutted and rebuilt, open-concept kitchen, master suite addition, two-car garage where Elizabeth's garden shed stood. "We're so grateful you're letting us love this house the way it deserves," Sarah told me. Love it? By destroying everything Elizabeth had created. The title agent, an efficient woman named Patricia Brooks, spread contracts across the table. "This should be straightforward," she announced. "Cash sale, no contingencies, clean title. We should be done in an hour." Clean title, if Patricia only knew. Christopher signed papers with flourish, like he was conquering the world. The Pattersons signed with quiet excitement, planning their demolition. I sat quietly thinking about Elizabeth's video message, about her prediction that Christopher would rush me through the sale, about her promise that justice would arrive with witnesses present. "Mr. Anderson?" Patricia Brooks was looking at me. "We need your signature on the deed transfer." I picked up the pen, then set it down. "Actually, there's something I need to discuss first." Christopher frowned. "Dad, what's wrong? We've been through all this." "I need to make a phone call." I pulled out my cell phone and dialed David Coleman's number. "David, it's Bill Anderson. We're at the closing now." "Excellent timing." David's voice was calm. "I'll be right there." I hung up and faced the table of confused faces. "My attorney will be here in a few minutes." Christopher's frown deepened. "Dad, what attorney? You don't have an attorney." "I do now." "Dad, what's going on? We don't need an attorney for this." Patricia Brooks looked concerned. "Mr. Anderson, is there a problem with the sale?" "There might be." The room fell silent. Sarah Patterson's renovation plan suddenly seemed less important. Michael checked his watch nervously. "Dad, you're scaring people," Christopher whispered. "What's this about?" "It's about your mother's wishes." Christopher's face went red. "Dad, Mom's been dead for a year. Her wishes don't matter anymore." "Doesn't matter." In front of 6 strangers, Christopher announced that his mother's wishes didn't matter. David Coleman arrived 15 minutes later, carrying a leather briefcase and radiating the kind of quiet authority that comes from handling serious money. "Good morning, everyone. I'm David Coleman, attorney for the Anderson Family Trust." Christopher stared. "Trust? What trust?" David set his briefcase on the conference table and opened it with deliberate precision. "Christopher, I believe your father has something to tell you." All eyes turned to me. The Pattersons looked confused. Janet Morrison looked worried. Patricia Brooks looked annoyed. Christopher looked terrified. "Son, your mother established a trust 4 years ago. She was concerned about what might happen to our home after she passed away." "What kind of trust?" David answered. "A family trust that holds all marital assets, including this house. Your father is the sole trustee and beneficiary." Christopher's mouth fell open. "That's impossible. You two never had trust money." David pulled out a document. "The Anderson Family Trust, established March 2019. Current value $35,247,892.33. The silence was deafening. Sarah Patterson gasped. Michael Patterson stared at the papers like they might bite him. Janet Morrison's face went white. Christopher stood up so fast his chair fell over. "That's impossible. You're lying." David placed bank statements on the table. Page after page of investment accounts, bond portfolios, real estate holdings. "Your mother inherited a manufacturing company in 1995. She spent 28 years quietly growing that inheritance." Christopher grabbed the papers. His hands shook as he read the numbers. $35 million? Mom was worth $35 million? "Your mother was worth considerably more than money," I said quietly. "But yes, financially she was quite successful." Christopher sank into his chair. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because," David continued, "Elizabeth was concerned about your reaction to wealth. She wanted to see how you'd treat your father during his grief before revealing the inheritance." Christopher's face cycled through confusion, anger, and growing horror. You mean this whole time when I was trying to help Dad manage his finances? You were trying to manage a portfolio worth $35 million without knowing it existed, David finished. Patricia Brooks cleared her throat. I'm sorry, but what does this mean for the sale? David smiled. It means Christopher has no legal authority to sell trust property. This entire transaction is void. The Pattersons looked like they'd been punched. Their renovation dreams crumbled in real time. But we already gave notice at our apartment, Sarah whispered. We spent $2,000 on architectural plans, Michael added. Christopher found his voice. Dad, you can still sell. You're the trustee, right? You can do whatever you want. You're correct, I said. I can do whatever I want. Christopher's relief lasted exactly 2 seconds. But I won't sell. This house was your mother's masterpiece. She designed every room, chose every fixture, planned every detail. She specifically stated that if you couldn't respect her legacy, you didn't deserve to inherit it. Christopher went pale. What does that mean? David opened another file. It means your inheritance from the trust is contingent on your father's assessment of your character during his grieving period. And? Christopher's voice was barely a whisper. I thought about Christopher rushing through Elizabeth's funeral, about his dismissive comments about wood and drywall, about his eagerness to sell her possessions and tear down her walls, about his announcement 5 minutes ago that her wishes didn't matter anymore. And I'm afraid you failed that assessment rather spectacularly. The room spun into chaos. Dad, please, I was trying to help. You were trying to control. I thought you needed support. You thought I needed management. Christopher turned to the Pattersons. I'm sorry, I had no idea. I thought I was helping my father. Michael Patterson stood up. We need to go. Our lawyer will be in touch about our expenses. Sarah Patterson gathered her renovation plans with tears in her eyes. Janet Morrison packed her paperwork without making eye contact with anyone. Patricia Brooks announced that Premier Title Company would be billing for their time. In 10 minutes, the conference room was empty except for me, Christopher, and David Coleman. Christopher sat in stunned silence, staring at the trust documents. Dad, I can fix this. I can change. I can learn to appreciate Mom's house the way you do. Can you bring her back to life so you can treat her with respect while she's dying? Christopher's shoulders sagged. Can you undo rushing through her funeral so you could get to the important business? Christopher started crying. Can you take back telling strangers that her design choices were dated and needed updating? Christopher sobbed. Can you apologize to your mother for announcing that her wishes don't matter because she's dead? Christopher couldn't speak. I stood up and gathered my coat. Your mother loved you, Christopher, but love doesn't mean letting you disrespect everything she held dear. David Coleman packed his briefcase. The trust will remain under your father's sole control. Your inheritance will depend entirely on whether you can learn to honor your mother's memory instead of commodifying it. I headed for the door, then turned back. Elizabeth knew exactly who you were, son. The question is whether you're capable of becoming someone she could be proud of. And with that, I walked away from the biggest financial mistake of Christopher's life, a mistake he'd made entirely on his own. I drove straight home from the title company, my hands still shaking from adrenaline. $35 million. Elizabeth had been secretly wealthy for almost our entire marriage, and she'd trusted me to handle Christopher exactly the way I had. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. Not like a museum of memories anymore, but like a sanctuary Elizabeth had specifically designed to be protected. Christopher called 6 times during the drive home. I didn't answer. David Coleman called once. How are you feeling, Mr. Anderson? Like Elizabeth knew exactly what she was doing. She did. And there's one more thing she wanted you to know. More surprises? She left video messages for Christopher, too. Instructions for how he can earn back her trust if he's willing to do the work. Elizabeth had planned for redemption, too. That was like her. Disappointed but not giving up completely. Should I give them to him? Not yet. Let him process what happened today. Let him decide whether he wants to change or just wants access to money. Christopher showed up at 7 that evening. I watched him sit in his car for 10 minutes before getting the courage to come to the door. When I opened it, his eyes were red from crying. Dad, can we talk? I let him in but didn't offer coffee. He sat on Elizabeth's reading chair, the one he'd wanted to put in storage for staging. I messed up. Yes, you did. I thought I was helping. You thought you were managing. Christopher looked around the living room like he was seeing it for the first time. Dad, I never understood what this place meant to you and Mom. No, you didn't. I saw problems that needed solving instead of memories that needed protecting. That was the closest Christopher had ever come to actual insight. Dad, the $35 million. Is that real? It's real. And Mom kept it secret our whole lives? She kept it safe. There's a difference. Christopher was quiet for several minutes. Dad, what do I have to do? To what? To fix this. To earn back Mom's trust. To prove I can be better. I thought about Elizabeth's video messages waiting in David Coleman's office. About her faith that Christopher could change if he wanted to badly enough. You have to stop thinking you know what's best for other people. Okay. You have to stop treating grief like inefficiency that needs to be managed. Okay. You have to learn that some things are worth more than their market value. Christopher nodded, but I wasn't sure he understood yet. And you have to prove you can respect your mother's wishes even when she's not here to enforce them. How do I do that? You figure that out. Elizabeth left instructions, but you have to want to follow them. Christopher stood up and walked to Elizabeth's china cabinet. He touched the glass gently like he was afraid he might break something precious. Dad, this cabinet. Mom spent hours arranging and rearranging these dishes. She did. I always thought it was silly. Who needs fancy dishes that never get used? They got used. Every Christmas, every Easter, every time we had something to celebrate. Christopher opened the cabinet and picked up one of Elizabeth's good plates, the ones with the delicate floral pattern she'd saved up to buy for our 5th anniversary. I remember now. She'd spend the whole morning setting the table perfectly. She loved making ordinary moments feel special. Christopher set the plate down carefully and closed the cabinet. Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve the inheritance. I just want to learn how to honor Mom the way she deserved. That was the first time Christopher had mentioned Elizabeth without immediately pivoting to practical concerns. There's something else you need to know, I said. What? The Pattersons are talking to a lawyer. They want compensation for their expenses. Christopher's face went pale. How much? Architectural plans, moving costs, storage fees for their apartment stuff. Maybe $10,000. I'll pay it. With what money? You spent your savings on that BMW lease thinking you were about to inherit $650,000. Christopher realized the scope of his mistake. He'd leveraged his entire financial future on money that was never his to claim. Dad, I'll figure it out. You'll figure it out without asking for help you haven't earned, Christopher nodded. And Christopher, the house stays exactly as your mother left it until you prove you understand why it matters. I understand. No, you don't. But maybe someday you will. After Christopher left, I called David Coleman. He wants to change, I told him. Good. Elizabeth hoped he would. When should I give him her video messages? When he stops asking what he has to do and starts doing what he knows is right. Because Elizabeth had taught me that redemption can't be earned through negotiation. It has to be earned through transformation. And that's something no trust fund can buy. The next few weeks brought consequences Christopher hadn't anticipated. Word spreads fast in our neighborhood. By Thursday, everyone knew the Anderson house sale had fallen through spectacularly. By Sunday, everyone knew why. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought me a casserole and some questions. Bill, is it true Christopher tried to sell Elizabeth's house without telling you about some inheritance? Small-town gossip has a way of growing in the telling. It's complicated, Helen. Well, I always thought that boy was too eager to change things. Elizabeth loved this house exactly the way it was. The neighborhood had noticed Christopher's arrogance, too. Janet Morrison called Tuesday morning. Mr. Anderson, I owe you an apology. Christopher led me to believe he had authority to list your property. He believed he did, too. The Pattersons are understandably upset. They've hired an attorney to recover their expenses. Christopher is aware. Mr. Anderson, I hope you'll consider listing with our agency when you're actually ready to sell. I'm not selling, Janet. Ever? Ever. There was a long pause. Mr. Anderson, may I ask why you let the process go so far? Because sometimes people need to see the full consequences of their assumptions. Christopher's consequences were mounting daily. The Pattersons' attorney sent a demand letter for $12,000. architectural plans, moving expenses, storage costs, and lost wages from time off work. Christopher's BMW got repossessed Thursday afternoon, right in his office parking lot in front of his coworkers. He'd been living paycheck to paycheck, assuming inheritance money would solve his financial problems. Now he had no inheritance and new debts he couldn't pay. He had to move back to his old apartment, the one he'd given notice on to buy our house. The landlord charged him double deposit for breaking lease terms. Christopher's ex-wife heard about the failed inheritance and increased her demands for back child support. His credit cards were maxed out from planning his post-inheritance lifestyle. But the financial consequences weren't the hardest part. Christopher's daughter, Emma, now 16, called me directly. "Grandpa Bill, what really happened with Dad and the house?" Emma was smart enough to ask for the real story. "Your father made some assumptions about money that turned out to be wrong. Dad told me Grandma Elizabeth left us millions of dollars, but you're keeping it from him." Christopher was still trying to manage the narrative. "Emma, your grandmother left instructions about how her money should be handled. Your father didn't follow those instructions." "What kind of instructions?" "Instructions about respecting people's wishes even after they're gone." Emma was quiet for a long time. "Grandpa, Dad tried to get me to talk to you about the inheritance. He wanted me to convince you to share it." That was a new low, even for Christopher. "What did you tell him?" "I told him Grandma Elizabeth was the smartest person I knew, and if she had concerns about his judgment, maybe he should listen instead of arguing." Elizabeth would have been proud of Emma's insight. "Can I come visit this weekend? I want to see Grandma's house the way she left it." "Of course." Emma spent Saturday afternoon with me, walking through each room while I told her Elizabeth's stories. The kitchen renovation that took 6 months because Elizabeth insisted on finding the perfect cabinet hardware. The reading nook she'd designed specifically for quiet afternoons. The craft room where she'd planned projects for Emma's future children. "Dad wanted to tear down walls in here," Emma said, standing in Elizabeth's craft room. "He didn't understand what they were for. Grandma always said every room should have a purpose and a story. She did." Emma found Elizabeth's portfolio of house plans, the ones Christopher had never bothered to look at. Grandpa, these are amazing. Grandma was like a real architect. She could have been if she'd wanted to. Why didn't she?" "Because she chose to invest her talents in our family instead." Emma spent an hour studying Elizabeth's sketches. "Dad doesn't see this stuff, does he? Your father sees problems to be solved. Your grandmother saw stories to be honored." Sunday morning, Christopher called. "Dad, Emma told me about her visit. She said you showed her Mom's design portfolio." "I did." "Dad, I never knew Mom drew up all those plans. You never asked. I thought the renovations were just random home improvement projects. They were carefully planned expressions of your mother's vision for our life together." Christopher was quiet. "Dad, Emma thinks I don't understand what Mom's house means. Emma's a smart girl." "She's right, isn't she? What do you think?" Another long pause. "Dad, can I come over this week? Not to talk about money, just to see the house the way Emma saw it?" That was progress. "Thursday evening works." "And Dad, I've been thinking about what you said, about proving I can respect Mom's wishes even when she's not here to enforce them." "What have you been thinking?" "I want to pay the Pattersons back, even if it takes me months. I want to apologize to Janet Morrison for wasting her time. I want to learn about Mom's design work before I ever comment on the house again. Those are good starts. And Dad, I want to stop trying to manage your life and start trying to understand it." That was the first time Christopher had acknowledged his fundamental mistake. "I'll see you Thursday, son." Because Elizabeth had been right about something else. People can change, but only if they want to badly enough. And for the first time since her funeral, Christopher seemed to want to change more than he wanted to be right. That was the beginning of earning back what he'd thrown away. But it was only the beginning. Real transformation would take much longer. 6 months later, Christopher has kept every promise he made. He paid the Pattersons back in full, working overtime and selling his golf clubs to cover the debt. He apologized to Janet Morrison and offered to pay her wasted commission from his own pocket. Most importantly, he spent 20 hours studying Elizabeth's design portfolio before setting foot in our house again. When he finally came for that visit, He walked through each room like he was meeting his mother for the first time. "Dad, I never realized Mom planned the sightlines from the kitchen to the garden so she could watch birds while doing dishes. She loved those cardinals. And this reading nook, the way she positioned it to catch afternoon light but stay private from the street. She read there every day for 15 years. Christopher touched the window seat cushions Elizabeth had sewn. I wanted to replace these. I thought they looked dated. They're not dated. They're loved." Christopher understood the difference now. David Coleman finally gave Christopher Elizabeth's video messages last month. Instructions for earning back trust, step by step, year by year. Christopher cried through all 6 videos. Elizabeth had believed in his capacity for growth, even when he couldn't see it himself. The inheritance remains in trust. Christopher won't gain access until he completes Elizabeth's requirements, which include 2 years of volunteer work and a written essay about the difference between value and price. But Christopher has stopped asking about the money. "Dad, I don't care if I never inherit anything. I just want to be worthy of Mom's love." That's when I knew Elizabeth's plan had worked. Christopher visits every Sunday now, not to check on my finances or push his agenda, but to hear more stories about his mother's dreams. He's learning to see our house the way Elizabeth saw it, not as real estate, but as a love letter written in wood and stone and careful choices. The trust documents remain locked in David Coleman's office, but trust itself is being rebuilt, one respectful conversation at a time. Elizabeth knew something I'd forgotten. Love doesn't end with death, but it does require honoring in life. Sometimes the most powerful inheritance isn't money. Sometimes it's the wisdom to know the difference between price and value. And Christopher is finally learning that lesson his mother died trying to teach him. If you're watching this story, please let me know where you're watching from, because this story proves that it's never too late to learn respect, even when the teacher is no longer here to see the lesson learned.